My name is Charles, and I'm trying to implement change when it comes to juvenile dependency, CPS, and juvenile court proceedings and matters in order to stop its unconstitutional process that deprives parents and children who both have their rights violated during this process, and in a scheme that is meant to deprive you, belittle your rights as a parent, and strip you of your parental rights, and have done so for incentive and profit. I have written a petition on change.org. The title of the petition is Dcfs, Dhs, and the Juvenile Dependency System or Scheme, and its unconstitutional and biased process. I'm going to go ahead and read to you from it, not all of it entirely, but it is lengthy, so please bear with me. But if you want information as far as termination of parental rights and how the scheme works, I'm the one to listen to, because I'll tell you what, it is complicated and very long, so please bear with me. The big business of the juvenile dependency scheme. For those who doubt this to be the case, your inaction may cost you your child one day. As a parent, since 1 in 3 odds that a CPS will be involved in the lives of children by the age of 18, and the fact that only 48% of children are reunified with their biological parents, which by itself proves the failure of a system and scheme meant to deprive its participants of more than just its parental rights, and has future implications that many do not consider that go far beyond the erosion of citizens of these supposed rights. Currently, today, it is estimated that 700 children are removed from their parents across the nation. That is a huge amount of children being detained weekly and separated from their biological families, and the effects of this alone leaves a due time for we people to come together to bring to light and forefront the absolute constitutional rights violations and alienation of a parent from their child. Hiding and justifying against actions, hiding behind best interest in child standards, statutes, and implementations that are undefined at best. Now, presently, today, adoption of a child and what it entails is much different than it was and most perceive it to be. Most think that once a child is adopted, it is the adopted parents absorb all financial responsibility for the child or minor adopted. However, contrary to this belief, this is not the case. An adopted parents of an adoptee receive and are given $1,200 a month for an adopted child, and can be more if disabled or has special needs. Also, they provide medical for the child adopted, as well as assistance in the care in the form of reimbursement for child care, preschool, and other extracurricular activities the child participates in. From the time of the initial detainment of a child's risk for abuse and neglect and mistreatment increases overall, as its numbers for abuse and injury rises significantly, as much as 50% more when compared to being in the homes of their biological families. All of this stemming from CPS and child services involvement in families' lives, implementing this process and system that continues the further punishing of child and their families who are made part of this ever-evolving scheme. Now again, I ask with you to bear with me, as its process is lengthy and impossible to explain in its entirety without having to do so. So with that being said, it's due time to expose the ever-evolving child welfare and juvenile dependency scheme and its immoral tactics used and designed to deceive its participants and take our child and children as a means for profit and gain monetarily. By delaying the return of a child to a biological parent, or adopting out a minor to a potential adoptive placement, social services sees fit. Adoption is ran concurrently, meaning it is planned for at the same time as reunification of the parent and child. Yet is the preference of the scheme for adoption at all phases, whether it's admitted or not, or acknowledged. Many contracted state and county service providers and adoption agencies are using our children as a means to collect governmentally provided federal funds. These government funds are allocated monetarily for reaching mandated protocols and junctures of the scheme. It seemingly rewards social workers and child welfare systems for failing parents in reunification by receiving federal money and adopting out a minor. To do so, it is required to terminate parental rights of a biological parent. Also, a parent can fail to reunify with the child in a timely manner, as there are statutory and legislative laws written and enacted to be able to terminate parental rights. This is at most times accomplished by unnecessarily extending out and delaying the return of a minor or child. The result of delaying a dependency case and extending out the return of a child to a parent's custody allows for it to reach the mandated statutory time limit to reunify, which their legislative law requires for them, the county, to file to terminate one's parental rights in order to free your child for adoption after they are awarded the court for 15 to 22 months. It's a very important number to remember. 15 to 22 months. By delaying and detaining children and minors until the mandated legislative statutory time limit and file for parental rights termination, which once it is occurring, they have a 97% winning percentage in parental rights termination trials, which is basically a slam dunk for social workers. And if terminated, you lose any and all rights to your child. And once it is finalized in adoption, you have zero say or any visitation, which in turn alienates biological mothers and fathers from their child, thereby robbing all three of the right to pursue the liberties established within the Constitution of the United States, such as the pursuit of liberty and happiness, and to raise our children without fear of government interference. Now, I want you to keep in mind that the scheme and process has absolutely zero rewards or incentives for reunification of a parent and child. Those are all reserved for the adoption of a child, allowing social services and child welfare systems to generate revenue from the legal kidnapping of children. It's a system or matrix that removes children from the biological parents' homes, extends and delays out their detainment to the last possible juncture, which conveniently the county is now obligated to file for parental rights termination that seeks to end a parent-child relationship permanently, and adoption again being the preference. Children and parents already traumatized by the removal of the minor from the parent's home are now left helpless, creating an emotionally, physically, and mentally incapacitating process that inflicts unnecessary detriment and trauma to the many families affected nationwide by child welfare services and child welfare systemic practices of its implementation of the dependency scheme, who are enforcing the claims brought forth by CPS. It seems the consequences are many in a scheme that lays claims that it doesn't punish children or parents that become or are made part of or involved in a dependency or child welfare case. Now explain to me again, how is it not punishment when to separate families and parents from their biological children, when the end result can end with one's parental rights being terminated and the loss of one's child permanently? This is a scheme designed to separate parents and their child for a means of gain and profit and revenue generated by counties and agencies throughout California by lengthening the detainment in cases involving parents and their children for federally funded purposes. You and your child are crucial to this system because without them there is no need to enforce this upon the citizens and implement it upon the parents and children. These very same citizens and parents are the people that the governing entities and agencies are sworn to protect and to uphold the rights of we the people, yet are depriving many of which the government is sworn to protect, especially when it comes to the rights of us all. This is a scheme in which you don't have a choice to be part of at times, as anyone can report suspected abuse allegations anonymously. Parents are then forced to agree to terms and conditions set forth by the scheme in order to afford a chance to be able to reunify with your child. Unfortunately, by the time you understand or have the complex knowledge of this system to be properly competent enough to defend yourself, it is far too late, as this is an expedited process that makes it even more unfair. There are many statute limitations in legislative law that allow for the process to be expedited, affording rush justice said to be needed, to obtain the stability and permanency of a child in the shortest amount of time while awarded the court. This is enforced in a manner which seeks out to extend detainment of a minor from its parent's care in this well thought out scheme. This expedited process allows for errors and mistakes to be often overlooked and accepted without recourse or relief for their wrongdoings when made by social workers who are part of your case. You and I are held accountable at our places of employment by our employers and can be docked wages without pay, suspended without pay, warned, or terminated for mistakes when made while in the employment of another. Yet these government entities get to be above the law as they are given a veil of amnesty protection. Parents that are left facing an outcome seemingly decided by the court before you even get a chance to dispute or contest an allegation alleged as zero factual truth or proof is needed to detain or take a child, for they can remove them as a word of the court if deemed necessary, as it is in the best interest to protect and beneficial to ensure the stability and permanency of a child or minor in question, is the only thing that's needed or required, and it's said to be done on a case-by-case basis. How is it that you can do everything asked of you by social services, and they can still terminate your parental rights, and you will lose rights to your child with little to no legal recourse to correct any wrongs or wrongdoings, or be able to seek any relief for the injustices done, and even if you were allowed to do so, have less than a 5% chance of winning, unless sadly on appeal. Despite the fact that many government officials, judges, and attorneys recognize and acknowledge that the system is broken, a system that divides and separates parents at an alarming rate, many say it lacks parental rights protections and other strict provisions and guidelines to limit the removal of biological parents' homes, to be able to stop the erroneous trauma inflicted by those who are supposed to protect children from actual serious, harmful, hurtful, and sexual abuse, not harmless forms of negligence or substance abuse, which substance abuse has been added as a medical diagnostic problem recently and is no longer a criminalized act unless you are selling it. Regardless, neither of the two proves the parent's inability to care or meet the child's needs overall, or that they are an abusive mother or father. To justify these decisions, it's said to be implemented and enforced to protect the individual minor in question by keeping the child a ward of the court and failing parents from reunifying and allowing the minimum time of a child to be returned to a parent's care is 6 months. Allows resource foster families to have time to form a bond with your child, as adoption is the preference at all phases of the scheme. Now, how does it not aid in the delay in permanency and stability of a minor if it's in its best interest to keep him from a parent by making 6 months the minimum return time a child can be returned when deemed to need out-of-home protection? You see, the unwritten intent of this is to allow resource and foster families time to decide if they want to adopt the child that has been placed with them. They take their time and delay setting up visitation for parents, and they give you the minimum time of 1 to 2 hours a week. Meanwhile, the other 23 hours they're with the resource family. It's especially pertinent, and they do it when it comes to a child who's under the age of 3 or an infant. You would think that if child welfare system and CPS were doing such great things, they would want all the people to know and hear about all these good things that come from detaining and separating families. Yet today's proceedings are now hidden behind the closed doors of juvenile confidentiality proceedings and the confidentiality protections afforded, as well as other supposed protective changes to minimize lawsuits. In doing so, it is given absolute control and power at every single aspect of the dependency case by social workers and contracted entities. They provide representation paid for by counties, these law firms contracted to represent individuals and fortunate enough to have an investigation or allegation founded against them by social services. Those who impose and enforce this dubious scheme, who have worked and chosen to implement it outside of its original intended purpose, being enforced by those contracted entities and social workers who knowingly are giving a veil of amnesty protection and take full advantage of it as they can lie, withhold, or fabricate evidence. The supposed purpose of this protection is the ability to carry out one's day-to-day duties without fear of repercussions or wrongdoings for mistakes made. The scheme justifies and protects the actions of those GHHS and third-party contracted agencies, and it's these same employed personnel who are tasked with and given the most delicate decision one can make in life to separate a child and parent permanently or to adopt a child out to a resource or foster family. By arbitrarily rendering and giving absolute power to social workers and their superiors, it has created an unfair bias process that has seemingly forgone family values and traditions, as they have traded our constitutional rights for incentives and profit overall. How exactly is this done, you ask? The federal funds allocated increase significantly the longer a child is detained or a ward of the court. This is especially true if the child or minor is an infant under the age of 3. This process and scheme knowingly violates your civil rights, is hidden way behind the closed doors of juvenile confidentiality proceedings afforded by confidentiality on such matters, and is done with the intent purpose as it enables Dcfs and child welfare services to ensnare parents in a trap. Parents who are threatened repeatedly with the loss of their child via adoption. In many cases, reasons for detainment are exacerbated by exaggerating and inflating initial allegations and findings as social workers who file these allegations and reports against a parent do so to lengthen detainment at each juncture of a dependency case. As families get framed negatively via social worker reports as to social worker recommendations and findings. The department, as is often referred to, expects parents to be perfect and never make mistakes. It's not so much the same for resource families who are treated like royalty for opening their homes, and hearts to those in foster care. They are considered a critical part of the team. So much so that social services help to cover up or minimize incidents that occur within the resource family homes. An example of this was my son's foot was burned on a BBQ grill in an incident where the resource family took over cooking duties while carrying my son in a frontward-facing holster, allowing for him to get close enough to the barbecue that his foot was burnt on the grill, resulting in third-degree burns on his feet and toes. Justifiably and rightly upset, as I could not fathom or get my head around the fact of why my son was so close to a barbecue to begin with, let alone close enough to get burnt by it, resulting in a painful injury to my child. CPS takes children for far less, yet the incident was minimized as to its importance, and a firm warning was issued to the resource family. No consequences or repercussion for any wrongdoings on the part of the resource family or social worker, and they negated it and framed it as my fault for if social services and Dcfs weren't involved or needed as to my dependency case and his removal from my care, it wouldn't have happened, and by deeming it to be handled properly internally, it in turn shut the door to my requests for my son to be returned to my care, as it was only one of many incidents in which my son was hurt while in care of the resource family. It was just another way to silence my voice or your voice in matters of your child. Social workers do as they please, as their personal feelings and beliefs are seen and deemed to be their child's best interest. Again, another way of hiding behind best interest findings and minimizing the parent's say as to what goes on and can and cannot be done while they're in court. Now, to add most noticeably is the ability to have compassion and fairness for all involved. Initially, the scheme afforded such, but has evolved into a scheme that belittles and restricts a parent's right when they're a party to the dependency scheme. Its parents and victims are parents who unknowingly, unwillingly become forced in a money trap. Juvenile dependency is an unfair, biased process used as a means for legal kidnappers. It's a scheme in which it is designed and enforced with the intention of violating your due process rights, parental rights, the right to a fair and speedy trial to be judged by a jury of your peers, a citizen's right to face your accuser, and many, many more. It's these ingredients that make up the differences between dependency law and juvenile dependency courts from other courts. As a citizen and person, you are afforded far more constitutional and protected rights than civil, family, and criminal law. It is justified by the so-called counterbalancing of the rights of a parent and the rights of the minor against one another. A best interest and beneficial to the child statute that claims to promote stability and permanency when deciding the placement of a child is highly undefined and uncapped, as there's no ceiling or limit as to what is and isn't beneficial to a child or in their best interest, or any strict provision or guidelines to keep it from being used or used as a means to terminate a parental right relationship unnecessarily. It is leading us down a slippery slope. As an example of this is the fact that 18% of children who are taken and removed from parents are justly removed for what CPS was originally intended and created for, such as physical, sexual, or other serious forms of abuse of a child or minor which they should be removed. Sadly, the majority of children are taken and removed for neglect and substance abuse. In finding reasonable cause to continue detainment for whatever excuse they conjure up, many ridiculous at best, and they have the gall to call it a reasonable finding. A reasonable finding is defined by the means that a normal, average person would do such or act in such a manner or way. The problem with that, it was meant to be found by a jury of your peers, not social workers and judges and attorneys deciding what reasonable is overall, making it biased and one-sided, and it should be deemed an unjust finding especially with it's done with the intent to keep a child from being returned to its biological parent. By hitting certain federal markers and required timelines to receive federally provided funds, in which counties use these funds to balance their budgets and checkbooks within their jurisdiction. Just as counties have found a way to make money off book and release of people from jails, the dependency scheme has created a business of gaining capital out of stealing our children and holding them ransom for financial gain, which sadly is unfortunate, as it has become grossly and widely accepted and enforced throughout the state of California and is gaining momentum nationwide. Reflected of this is only approximately 48% of children taken who are made aware to the court or returned to the home of their biological families. Reunification is the first objective, and currently adoption is ran as well. If reunification services are terminated, again, which is to be filed and done after your child is deemed a ward of the court for 15 to 22 months, and it's at this time the resource family can petition for de facto parent status, and if granted so, begins the taking away of your parental rights, further lessening your chance of your child returned to you. Just as everything in this scheme is against you, and the chances of your child throughout your dependency case, it also makes it impossible for you to get your child returned to you in a timely fashion. I apologize. It is my goal to make others aware of what goes on in this informative and eye-opening first-hand account inside the world of child welfare services and third-party contracted agencies by the states and counties to oversee services of your case. It is proposed statistically that 1 in 3 children will come into contact with CPS and child welfare protective services by the age of 18. These investigated cases are usually reported anonymously and are to be investigated by CPS, who has full discretion as to whether or not to investigate and open a case based on such claims reported. If upon a completion of their investigation, this is after interviewing the minor in question, talking to others about you, and various other factors, decide whether or not the allegations are founded or unfounded against you. Now, truth has no place as to the allegations against you or the outcome of the claims, since out of caution for the child, if it is deemed the slightest of a possibility abuse has occurred, then the investigative social worker files a claim against you for endangerment, neglect, or abuse. These allegations decided and deemed to be founded necessary to intervene, and you and your child fall within the jurisdiction of the county or court once filed, that further action is required. Your case is handed off to a third-party contracted company, a private company contracted by the county, and is overseen by county and city council members and prosecuted by county prosecutors who work for them. It's a dubious scheme that violates the rights and destroys families in an instant, and the trauma and repercussions are many. It is said to be voiced to and for all parents and children alike, citizens of this great nation of the United States of America, to protect families from the imposed punitive actions forced upon parents. And what I convey and share with you is the process of which you go through in a scheme that does and has violated one's constitutional rights of not just adult parents and children, but of all our fellow citizens, sons and daughters, mothers and fathers alike. Those who have been deprived and let down by a system already know it is tearing apart the fabric of this great nation. By systematically separating mothers and fathers from their children, violating the 5th, 14th Amendments to the Constitution, making it a crisis that is happening daily. Because it has 1 in 3 odds that your child will have contact with the CPS by the time the child turns 18, is an issue and crisis worthy of your time to help other mothers and fathers not have to endure or experience, making it a fight worthy of fighting for, as the future rights of the people are eroded, making it a matter of constitutional magnitude and construct as to its importance. The very society we live in is alienating and depriving many biological parents of their children, and creating a society in which paternity and biology of our dependents and genealogy of our offspring means absolutely nothing. This is by design and a scheme derived to rob and belittle our rights as people of this great nation to be able to raise and rear our children in a manner in which we see fit without government interference as to religious preference, educational, medical, and overall well-being of children born to us. It violates and stomps on our natural rights as fathers and mothers born of this great nation in the caring and well-being of our children, taking them from biological families, depriving them of their birthright, adopting them out to other families, and terminating parental rights to separate children and parents, and ever further erode parental rights in this nation to mean nothing in the end. driven by money and greed, CPS, DHHS, Dcfs, or any other name chosen to be given to any government or government-contracted agency throughout the United States, recognized or associated as any other name one calls CPS or Child Welfare Services, and a dependency scheme created, and the power given to these entities who are abusing I apologize once again, abusing the power given and invested in them by the people, investing and implementing it in ways never meant, establishing such entities have given way, wielding and enforcing such in ways we the people never wanted or intended for it to be used. It has evolved and is justifiably used in the deprivation and legal kidnapping of our children, justified by supposed protection of a child, of needed protection for a child from abuse. By allowing them to separate families and children across this nation at an ever-growing rate, as 700 children are separated daily from their parents, who were given and entrusted the government authority to protect the welfare of our children and supposed protections it was promised in doing so, have perverted it as a means for financial gain, given way to false pretense, afforded to them judicially, hidden behind the closed doors of juvenile confidentiality, and given absolute power to alienate and deprive many citizens and parents of their children, unremorseful and ill-refuted by the said powers that be to protect our youth, have no problem violating due process rights and many other guaranteed rights of the Constitution, and do so by trickery and fraudulent means. In many ways is tearing apart the fabric of this nation, and those who are part of this dynamic scheme are morally and irrationally killing natural rights, constitutional rights of all involved in this so-called dependency scheme is one of moral depravity that is beyond one's measure and construct, and comprehending the understanding and comprehending the atrocities committed and enforced upon our fellow brothers and sisters. Sickening to the core in its proposed purpose, it is one of immorality of its known effect and actions, in which deceitful tactics are used in order to deprive biological parents of their own offspring and children by a means that was meant to protect and help abused children and protect them from physical, sexual, and other serious harmful forms of abuse. It has been warped into a money-making scheme. Agencies and counties use these funds by the dependency scheme by robbing its own residents residing within its jurisdiction, taking away their children from them, and at times permanently severing their relationship, doing so without due process and hide behind best interest and beneficials of interest of a child, which makes a mockery of our rights, which between criminal, family, and civil law has the least amount of rights and protections the Constitution offers, and a process that violates them knowingly and purposely. It is threatening our very way of life, and unless restricted and controlled or revamped entirely, is a scheme that will not stop or spare anyone from its grasp, taking by any means as it wants, creating new ways to continue and depriving parents and children of their said rights until they no longer mean anything in the end and are forgotten altogether. Does this sound extreme? I deplore you to raise your voice, as now is the time to stand up against this immoral and monetarily hungry machine known as Juvenile Dependency Court and its sidekick CPS, who claims to be heroes protecting children, but in all reality they hide behind the closed doors of juvenile confidentiality agreements and deprive parents and children who both have their rights violated during the course of the proceedings and hearings that take place, that are not allowed to be publicly viewed or monitored or screened, nor do you have the right to be judged by a jury of your peers as to whether or not the claims against you are true, and instead social workers and Dcfs get to be your judge and jury in deciding this most important and delicate decision. And they are rewarded monetarily for doing so, as there's no reward for reunification of a parent and child. Only incentives are given for adoption of a child, which counties then rely on and become used to these transactions in federal money, and have found a way to make money for severing parental rights in a scheme where you can do absolutely everything right and that they ask of you, and unless it's found to be in your best interest of your child or beneficial, you can still have your parental rights terminated in this scheme, which by definition means to deprive someone of something, and that's exactly what they want to do. Keep your child as long as possible to collect as much federal money, hitting certain markers and requirements of the government in order to do so. Given and invested and entrusted to them by we the people. Oops, I'm sorry, I totally messed that one up. Okay, there's my papers. That's all right. You learn that the more time that goes by, and the more hopeless and difficult it becomes to bring your child home. In my case, my son, an infant, who was once detained and removed on 6/19/2020. I was not afforded to see my son until the August 19th, 2020, a full 2 months after he was detained, after only allowed to have my son at home and in my care for 4 days as he was born positive tox for substances. At the time of the safety agreement was made, and before leaving the hospital by the investigative social worker and I unknowingly violated said agreement 3 times before I even left the hospital or arrived at the residence in which I was to be residing, leading to his emergency detainment by CPS, robbing his mother and I of 2 months of crucial bonding time in which many firsts were missed overall during my 18-month case in which my parental rights were involuntarily terminated. In preference of adoption by the resource family, after reunification attempts failed, after he was returned to his mother and she relapsed on alcohol after 2+ years of sobriety from substances, and even after redetainment, I had removed all of the reasons and needs for him to be out of my care, and still wasn't considered. My parental rights were terminated, and my son lost to the system, and it left me wondering, how in the hell could this have even happened? For I had never harmed a single hair on my son's head, let alone abused him. It's sad that they inflate and exacerbate anything and everything and create ways to use the most innocent things against you in court proceedings, which social worker reports are provided to all parties and recommendations of the department are made and how things are progressing and the action of the department, if any is wanted to be made. These reports are the basis of your case, and once submitted by you or your counsel, whether true or factual, once submitted it becomes the truth. Read that again. Once the judge accepts you or your counsel's decision, apologize once again. Counsel's acknowledgement and is deemed and agreed to be submitted, whether true or factual or not. Upon submission, it becomes the truth. Judges always side with social workers and attorneys for your child who is afforded representation. All the attorneys and social workers are against you, as each parent is provided with counsel to help represent you in dependency proceedings and hearings. They all take place behind closed doors of juvenile confidentiality and is closed to the public and not screened or monitored by anyone except city and county council members, not elected officials, as the only judicial oversight of dependency or CPS cases. Confidentiality, because of its nature involving minors, is prosecutable and a felony if convicted of breaking such said agreement, leaving you unable to talk about your case with anyone outside of your provided counsel or attorney, or your services groups because they have their own confidentiality agreements, leaving it impossible for you to report or complain to anyone outside of your case to any misconduct or violation, and if one is brought to their attention, it is either swept under the rug as no big deal, may or not be corrected, or at very least they will claim amnesty given to government employee personnel who are afforded to such to do their jobs without recourse or punishment for their mistakes or wrongdoings. Now I want to point out that the average person who has not had any involvement with CPS or knows somebody who has is completely unaware of any of these things when your child is detained and taken. Social workers, judges, and counsel know all the rules, and they do this day in and day out for a living, yet parents of a child taken get to learn it all on the fly as it comes, leaving you constantly blind, behind, unaware of your rights, and are streamlined through an unfair process that leaves a parent already shaken and distraught from having their parent or their child removed from them. And as you go on, you discover you are falsely comforted and told things that are blatant lie, used as a means to minimize confrontation and disputes and push the agenda of your case down the road as long as possible while keeping you at bay, keeping you emotionally, physically, and mentally incapacitated. Have I overwhelmed and blown your mind yet? It's a lot to take in. I personally took a self-taught crash course to learn about the dependency scheme. This was due to lack of representation by my counsel over the duration of my case. I could not afford to hire an attorney, that and discovered it's hard to find one to represent you, since only 48% of children reunify with their parent, and 97% prosecution rate at TPR 366.26 trials. Attorneys get notoriety for winning cases, and rarely do you win in a dependency scheme. And it's hard to take somebody's money when you know you are going to lose for the most part, which I get and understand, and appreciated the honesty of those whose services I tried to obtain to represent me. I digress, so please accept my apology. I write this as a father who lost parental rights to his and they were terminated as to my son, and I've made it my mission to educate and make sure others who become part of this scheme know what they are up against and the steps taken by social services and its providers in the alienation of parents from their children and the huge undertaking and emotional mental toll evoked when made part of this horrific scheme to deprive you of your child as a means of legal kidnapping and separation of your child. As anyone can report child abuse anonymously, and if investigated, the possible outcome is the permanent loss of your child due to such allegations and investigations by CPS. You're technically only part of your case for the investigative portion before handing it off to a third-party contracted service provider to monitor and oversee your case. A third-party provider contracted this service is not free. They're in it for profit, and whether you choose to believe it or not, the scheme is a means of turning your child into a means to make money and profit from failing parents and overcoming whatever reason their child is detained, and without compensation available for reunification of a parent. The adoption of a child is always the preference of the scheme. Why, you ask, is this way? Because they get money for it. I'll say that again. They make money for it and do so and maximize its earnings when it comes to detained children. Social services receive financial gain for your child from the moment a report is made to CPS and your life is turned upside down without the right to face your accuser, a violation of the Sixth Amendment, and social workers can lie due to amnesty, are afforded and able to rely on not just hearsay, but third-party hearsay. The entire process is a lot to take in. Take it from a father who's been through this process and put countless hours of research and time and still finding ways the department railroaded my case and due to statutory limitations can do nothing to rectify the system or seek any justice or remedy the wrongdoings of those involved in my case. The dependency scheme is the most stressful, traumatizing, disgraceful, sickening, hurtful, humiliating, and overall disgusting process I have ever been through. The process of the dependency scheme hurts parents. Now, I have served in the military, had overcome countless obstacles and hardships throughout my life, always overcoming and bettering myself from these obstacles. Yet the loss of my son due to this scheme is by far the most tragic, moral degrading parents' experience to have to be put through. It's very surreal, as after you lose your parental rights, you're terminated. It's just over. That's it. An arranged last visit is ordered by the court, and we are allowed to get a final goodbye visit. An arranged visit that county law enforcement is on hand and oversees it with social workers, making sure you don't run off with your child. Allotted an hour visit, which is the hardest thing to ever have to do. I was forced to say goodbye to my sweet, smart, intelligent, handsome, blue-eyed little boy. By far the hardest thing I've ever had to do, and it still affects me to this day. Not a minute goes by I do not miss or think about my son, who was taken from me in the most perverse and unjust manner, that it is woundedly deep me in losing him to a system in which opinion of me I couldn't change. I could do nothing to change the outcome, and it affected me greatly, for now the world as I see it has changed me forever. To sever the bond between a parent and child is a hurt and pain that never goes away. Deemed unfit to care and raise my child, and to be painted and cast in such a way by social workers inaccurately, still to this day leaves me to ponder how this happened to me, as I never believed in a million years I would lose the rights to my son and they would be terminated in preference of adoption. I had turned my whole life around. I'm self-employed as a contractor. I run my own business. I am engaged and soon to have a stepdaughter and stepson. I'm a law-abiding, protective member of society who fought and served his country in the armed forces, serving 8 years, doing 2 tours, one in Iraq and one in Afghanistan. Fought and overcame homelessness, clawing my way out to be self-sufficient. Been told by many to be a good, decent, overall person who relentlessly helps others in needs. That's their words, not mine. The punishment dealt to me in the loss of my one and only biological son to a scheme that did what it was designed to do, and we as the people allow it. It's sad that nobody knows about it until you were in it and part of it. Always kept in the dark and 10 steps behind. The obstacles and hurdles and hoops required of you to jump through in order to be afforded a chance to bring your child home. A huge undertaking, all while mentally, emotionally reeling from being separated from your child. If you ask me, all the juvenile dependency scheme affords to those unfortunate enough to have to go through or be put through it is beyond words and comprehension as to the effects and grief felt from the loss of your child. Is one I wish no one to have to go through themselves. Sadly, at times I break down and cry, as grief is like a wave. It comes over you swift and heavy, and there's nothing you can do but ride it out and hope it gets easier over time. For me, it hasn't, but here's the hope. I do my damnedest to stay strong and move on from all that's taken place, but so many things have been robbed of as time has been taken away and cannot be returned, just as many milestones and firsts have been missed and lost out on. To myself, as a father, there is nothing in this world that compares to your biological child's unconditional love and joys and happiness they bring to your life. Their pure and unconditional innocent love shared between a parent and child is precious and irreplaceable. It's what I, as a person who has always wanted to be a father my entire life, misses the most. It was my son's love of me, his father, and love given by myself, his father, which has been severed permanently. I miss everything about my son. I miss his laugh, the time we used to get to spend together, taking time in educating, playing, and loving one another. My son is the best thing that has ever happened to me and that I've ever done in this life, as he is my mini-me. He got all the best parts of me. I apologize as I dropped the last page. I apologize. My heart forever remains with him as I pray for the day I can see him again, as every passing minute seems like an eternity. Now, I chose to share my story and knowledge is obtained from this process, as it is told with a pain that no other parent should feel or have to go through. And I pray this doesn't fall on deaf ears, as many people don't, refuse to, or won't believe that such a system or scheme exists, and that what I share with you is factual or true. I encourage you to put in the time to do the research and verify it all for yourself. If you follow the money, you will know more about the scheme than you'll ever have wanted to know or learn as to the injustice and deceptive ways that a child is taken and farmed out and legally kidnapped. I cannot stress the importance of the need to stop or revamp a system everyone knows is broken, yet do nothing to correct or fix it. And they know it's broken. For myself as a person, a son, a father, and veteran of the United States, I leave you with this thought. What reason or benefit would I have or gain by sharing this with you, other than to prevent and educate you and others, stop it from happening, and anyone else who's dragged through the dependency process and has a child removed to the uphill battle before you if by chance you do one day become party of the dependency scheme and its unfair and unconstitutional practices and process that is blatantly wrong. It's all too familiar and known that the system is broken, yet because there is so much money involved, as $100 billion is allocated annually, given to counties, relied upon by judges, attorneys, court reporters, bailiffs, social workers, and the list goes on. How is it no one sees as to the wonder of the fact that reunification failure has become the norm, given that less than 10% of that dollar budget is spent on the reunification of a parent and child? Unfortunately, the more time that goes by, the greater the need or want to change or repair the system is met with resistance and set on the back burner, as many of those who were inspired or fueled to stand up against this scheme, those who have tried to stop by exposing this process for what it really is, sadly can't be asked their opinions anymore, and the fact that they are dead and missing, seemingly eliminated for trying to do just and right, many paid for it with their lives, silenced due to the money and greed of others. Now I leave you with that thought, and to process the unconstitutional process of CPS and juvenile dependency scheme. Now remember, it's a long, painful journey, and I hope I've enlightened you, and I wish you the best in the fight for your child, and pray for an outcome that differs from mine. I apologize, it's always hard for me to read, but everything in there you can verify for yourself. We need change, people. I can't do it myself. Please go to change.org and sign my petition, Dcfs and DHHS and juvenile dependency and its unfair and unconstitutional bias process, and allow me to get in front of somebody to make change. That's what I'm looking for. I thank you for your time, and I wish you an outcome better than mine. I miss my son every day, and I wish there was something I could do in order to be able to see him. My heart's broke, and I don't know if it will ever be right. Thank you for your time.